For more than 200 years, the lighthouse stood alone at the edge of a violent sea. No village claimed it. No fisherman wanted to sail too close to it. And according to an old story passed from one generation to another, the lighthouse keeper who entered its hidden chamber would never return the same. The lighthouse was called Blackwater Beacon. It had been built in 1824, on a narrow cliff far beyond the nearest coastal town. Its stone walls had survived countless storms. Its windows had been shattered and replaced dozens of times, and its great lantern had continued to shine through nights when the sea swallowed entire ships. But there was one thing nobody could explain. Every night at exactly midnight, the lighthouse produced a second light. It did not come from the lantern room. It came from somewhere beneath the tower. For 200 years, nobody had discovered where. Then, one autumn evening, a young historian named Daniel Reed arrived at Blackwater Beacon carrying an old leather journal that had belonged to his great-grandfather. Daniel had spent years studying forgotten buildings and unexplained historical mysteries. When he discovered a handwritten sentence inside the journal, he could not ignore it. It read, "At Blackwater Beacon, the light below the tower is not meant to guide ships. It is meant to guide someone home." Daniel reached the lighthouse just before sunset. The tower rose above him like a black needle against the orange sky. Wind screamed around the cliffs, and waves crashed against the rocks hundreds of feet below. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything smelled of salt, dust, and old wood. Daniel switched on his flashlight and stepped into the circular entrance hall. On the wall hung portraits of former lighthouse keepers. There were 17 portraits. But Daniel immediately noticed something strange. The dates beneath the portraits were not continuous. The first keeper was listed as Thomas Vale, 1824. The next was Edward Morris, 1831. Then came Samuel Carter, 1847. But between 1831 and 1847, there was a gap of 16 years. Daniel opened his journal. His great-grandfather had written about that gap. Never trust the official records. The missing keeper was erased. Daniel's heart began beating faster. He climbed the spiral staircase. At the top, he inspected the enormous lantern. It was old but carefully maintained. Nothing seemed unusual. Then midnight arrived. The lantern suddenly flickered. Once, twice. Then it went completely dark. Daniel froze. For several seconds, the entire lighthouse was silent. Then he saw it. A faint blue glow appeared beneath his feet. It was coming through a crack between the stone floor. Daniel slowly knelt down. The glow disappeared. He touched the stone. Cold. Very cold. Then something beneath the floor made a soft clicking sound. Daniel pulled back. Another click. Then silence. He remembered the words in the journal. The light below the tower. Daniel began searching the room. Behind an old wooden cabinet, he found a small iron ring attached to the floor. He pulled it. Nothing happened. He pulled harder. A section of stone shifted. Beneath it was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Daniel stared into the opening. For 200 years, nobody had officially recorded this staircase. He turned on his flashlight and began going down. The stairs seemed endless. The air became colder. At the bottom, Daniel entered a small underground corridor. The walls were covered with strange markings. Some looked like numbers. Others looked like symbols. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy iron door. Across it were 7 words. The sea remembers what men forget. Daniel pushed the door. It opened. Inside was a room filled with old objects. Broken compass needles. Rusty keys. Ship bells. Maps. Letters. And hundreds of names carved into the walls. Daniel recognized some of them. They belonged to ships that had disappeared in the region during the 19th century. But one name made him stop. The Aurora. His great-grandfather's journal had mentioned that ship. According to family history, the Aurora had disappeared in 1831. Daniel found an old wooden box beneath a table. Inside was a letter. The paper was yellow with age. The handwriting was faded, but Daniel could read it. To whoever discovers this room. Daniel unfolded the letter. The lighthouse was never built merely to guide ships. It was built to hide the truth. Daniel continued reading. In 1824, the lighthouse's first keeper, Thomas Vale, discovered that the cliff beneath the tower contained an ancient underground passage leading toward the sea. Inside that passage, he found evidence of something terrifying. For decades, ships had been disappearing near Blackwater Reef. The official explanation was storms. But Thomas discovered another truth. A secret group had been using the lighthouse to lure ships toward the rocks. The lighthouse signal was deliberately altered on certain nights. Ships followed the false light. They crashed, and their cargo was secretly recovered. The lighthouse had become part of a smuggling operation. Thomas Vale tried to expose them. He disappeared. His name was almost erased from history. Daniel stared at the letter, but then he noticed another page. The final paragraph was written in darker ink. Thomas did not die in the sea. Daniel's hands trembled. He was trapped beneath the lighthouse. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the underground corridor. Footsteps. Daniel turned. Nobody was there. The footsteps came again. Closer. Daniel grabbed his flashlight. Hello. No answer. Then he saw something at the far end of the corridor. A shadow. It moved slowly across the wall. Daniel stepped backward. The underground lantern suddenly turned blue. The entire room filled with light. And on the wall appeared a message that had not been there before. He is still waiting. Daniel ran toward the staircase. But before he reached it, he heard a voice behind him. Don't leave. Daniel stopped. The voice sounded like an old man. Who are you? Silence. Then, Thomas. Daniel slowly turned. At the end of the corridor stood the figure of an elderly lighthouse keeper. His clothes appeared to belong to the 19th century. His face was pale, but his expression was not frightening. It was tired. Daniel could barely speak. Are you Thomas Vale? The figure nodded. You came because of the journal. Daniel looked down at the leather journal in his hand. Why have you been waiting? Thomas pointed toward a sealed stone wall. Because the truth is behind there. Daniel approached the wall. There was a small metal keyhole. Thomas held out his hand. A rusty key appeared in his palm. Daniel took it. He inserted the key. The wall unlocked. A hidden chamber opened. Inside was a wooden chest. Daniel opened it. There were documents, names, maps, ship manifests, and evidence connecting powerful merchants and officials to the disappearances. But beneath the documents was something else. A small photograph. Daniel stared at it. It showed the first lighthouse keeper, Thomas Vale. Standing beside him was another man. Daniel recognized the second face immediately. It belonged to one of his own ancestors. 4 generations. Daniel's family had believed their ancestor was a hero who helped build Blackwater Beacon. The photograph revealed something completely different. His ancestor had been one of the men involved in the secret operation. Daniel felt sick with shock. Thomas spoke quietly. Your family kept the secret. Daniel looked at him. Then why did you bring me here? Because someone in your family finally decided. The truth mattered more than the name. Daniel remembered his great-grandfather's journal. Perhaps he had known. Perhaps he had spent his entire life trying to uncover what his ancestors had hidden. Daniel picked up the documents. Why didn't you reveal this yourself? Thomas looked toward the sea. Because I died before I could. The lighthouse suddenly shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. A distant wave exploded against the cliff. Thomas pointed toward the stairs. Take the evidence. Daniel hurried upward. But before he left, he looked back. Thomas was standing beneath the blue light. Daniel asked one final question. What happens now? Thomas smiled faintly. Now the lighthouse can finally rest. Daniel reached the lantern room. The great lighthouse lamp suddenly came alive. This time, its light was stronger than ever. It swept across the black ocean. And for the first time in 200 years, there was no second blue light beneath the tower. The next morning, Daniel contacted historians and authorities. The documents were examined. Everything was real. The secret chamber had remained untouched for generations. The names of missing sailors were restored to historical records. The story of Thomas Vale was finally told. Blackwater Beacon became a protected historical site. But Daniel kept one final secret. Before leaving the lighthouse, he returned to the underground chamber. Thomas was gone. On the stone wall, however, there was a new inscription. It had not been there before. Only 6 words. "Thank you for letting me go." Daniel never forgot those words. Years later, whenever storms covered the coastline, he would visit the lighthouse. And according to the people who lived nearby, the beacon always shone normally, except on one night every year. At exactly midnight, the light briefly turned blue. Just once. Then it disappeared. Some believe it is only an old electrical fault. Others believe Thomas Vale is still watching over the sea. But Daniel knew the truth. The lighthouse had never been haunted by a monster. It had been haunted by a secret hidden for 200 years. And sometimes, the darkest places are not hiding ghosts. They are hiding the truth. If you enjoyed this mysterious journey into Blackwater Beacon, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there are countless abandoned buildings, forgotten towers, and ancient places around the world that still have stories waiting to be discovered. And perhaps the next mystery is hiding somewhere much closer than you think.